All right, well, let's get started. Thanks everyone again for joining. I see a good number of repeat attendees on our roundtable, a bunch of new faces and names as well. So thanks for those coming back, and thanks for those who are kind of joining us for the first time. Just to really quickly, just explain the format and what we do here. I mean, this is really, really informal. Many of you submitted topics and questions ahead of time. Us as Team Genius, we're just hosting, trying to, bring the group together and answer some questions, share ideas. Everyone has common challenges right now. And, we started this, I think this is our 5th week now. It's just been growing each week in terms of participants, and our format and structure is getting a little bit better, I hope. But again, this is for you. This is really meant to be peer-to-peer. We're just kind of here to organize and facilitate. And sure, we talk to, dozens of youth sports organizations every week across our team. And so, of course, we're hearing a lot, too, of different ideas, different things people are doing. And we're going to try to pull out some of those trends just to get us started on a few topics. But really, this is meant to be driven by you. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time. Ask questions, share your perspective. That's really what's going to make this valuable. So just to introduce, us as the hosts, I'm Chris Knutson, co-founder and CEO of Team Genius. I know we have a bunch of customers on the call who are, of course, familiar with us, but in case you're not and kind of new to us, we basically provide a web and mobile app to help organizations improve their player evaluations. So everything from tryouts to player feedback, coach evaluations, camps, and really, make that process more efficient, more fair, more accurate for tryouts, but then also retain the ongoing data for player evaluation. So you can actually build up those histories on players. You can get new coaches up to speed quickly, and things along those lines. So with me, I've got Ruth Nicholson. Ruth is, a really experienced youth sports leader. She's been in the game a while and understands how organizations operate and many of the challenges that they face. So Ruth is an employee with Team Genius. She trains and supports customers. So some of you may know her in that regard. And she also runs her own organization called Go and does governance and operations consulting and support for youth sports organizations. So Ruth is going to facilitate today. Before I turn it over to her, just to introduce Gabe Skelly, also on the Team Genius side. Gabe's going to help kind of get us started on a couple topics as well. Gabe is our customer success manager. So if you've ever seen our videos online or any of our training or support, I see a couple of smiles, or you've probably seen the Gabe, and Gabe kind of his big personality, taking our customers through the product and training and trying to provide helpful content as much as possible. So Gabe will be certainly involved as well, but again, we're not here to present at you. This is meant to be really for you. We want you all to participate as much as possible. And really, we don't have a lot to say. We're going to just try to introduce the topics, share a couple thoughts, and go from there. So let's jump in here, and I'm going to turn it over to Ruth to kick us off with the first topic.
Right. So we had like 40 questions come in this past week. So there's a lot on people's minds. I went through and sort of bunched them up into four chunks. One was, how are clubs staying connected to their players and parents right now? There were a bunch of questions around that. There were a lot of questions about refunds and credits and how cash flow is affecting your employees and your coaches. One person wanted to know about holding AGMs in a time when getting together is difficult. And then there was another chunk of questions about the future. What's it going to look like when we can get back on the ice, back on the field? What are the new policies and protocols that we might be facing? And how do we keep kids engaged in our sports and not lose them altogether? So my proposal to you is that we sort of do this in 4 chunks. I'll give it to Gabe or Chris to share a little bit about what we've been hearing as we're talking to people in sport. And then we want to know what you're hearing and what you're doing and what your questions are. So feel free to use the chat box, add questions, or jump in the conversation, because this is all about finding ways to help you make this time a little bit less frustrating. So with that, the first chunk of questions we had, how are clubs staying connected to their players and parents right now? Gabe, I don't know how many phone calls you make in a day, but it's a whole bunch. What are you hearing from folks about staying connected?
Really just that a lot of clubs are trying to figure out what they can do to connect with players and parents, for a lot of reasons, go into finance reasons later, but just so that they can communicate with, the players, knowing that they've got a spot in the team, showing that their coaches care and the organization cares. And really beyond just the simple communications, keeping the players training, getting up to speed for when their season's starting. We've got a lot of different sports we work with. All across the board, all across the world here at Team Genius. So there's, different organizations and different sports that are in all different phases of training. For those clubs where they have, sports that are coming up now, training that the kids can do at home, doing remote training where they're doing, drills at home. We've got a nice video feature that we've been working with where, parents can do video of their kids, and then the coaches at organizations can give either text or video feedback on how those kids are doing with that training. It can be done weekly, monthly, as often as you want to, but it's just a nice way to have that feedback to the players from their specific coaches on how they're doing at these different things. And different ways of communicating too, right? So using Zoom meetings, doing two-way communication, I think, is the best. And a lot of people have said that. So any way that they can, share video one way, share video the other way, or even doing, if people are going to do YouTube videos, I've seen a lot of YouTube channels started that I haven't seen before. People putting videos on there on a regular basis. Also people setting a live stream at a certain time. So say, 3:00 Central, every Wednesday, your club's going to have a coach on to do some drills where the players can see that. And then on the other side of it, having, different competitions where players are engaging with them, videoing themselves doing, kicking drills or push-up drills, or you name the thing, and posting those on, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all these different multitudes of social media platforms. I've seen some larger organizations even doing, gift cards around those and turning them into things where you get a prize if you, do a certain level in some of these drills to kind of get even more kids doing them. So I just see a real need for the organizations to keep connected with the players and parents, and the parents that, a lot of us, like me, I'm working from home with 4 kids. They want to have a way that their kids can engage with their sport and their club, to take maybe a little bit of that pressure off the parents too. So they have some guidance in what the kids could be doing to be training at home, getting better at home. And then the kids like it because they've got something they can go towards. If you're doing it in a way where you can grade them, they've got, weekly goals. They can see if they're getting better, and it's good for them physically. And then also keeps their mind off of maybe other things that aren't as perfect as they'd like right now with, current state of some of the things going on. So yeah, just a multitude of platforms. And like, I'm always a proponent of video. As much as you can use video and, two-way communication, the better, and getting kids the feedback and keeping your coaches involved and keeping the parents involved.
So what are others doing? How are you keeping your players and your parents engaged? Anyone?
Yeah, this is Doug Murray from Ballistic United Soccer in California. Hi, everybody.
Hi, what are you doing, Doug?
So we are doing a weekly, so I'm a director. I'm in charge of our youngers, 8s through 12s. I am also the first team coach of our 12s. Actually was just on a call with Gabe shortly ago. So we have a weekly Zoom meeting that I tell them is going to be an hour. And then they're free to go after an hour. It ends up being about 2 hours just because they dig it, and they want to stay on and they want to stay connected. We're doing a lot of different things. We have a sports therapist that we use, and we're doing a website thing with her, just about the mental aspects of the game. We do video stuff. They're probably working as hard now as they were when we were on the field, and really, really embracing it. So we've had, and I'm very connected with my parents. I'm sure we all have in the back of our mind, what's going to happen when spring doesn't happen, which it's probably not going to. And they've paid money for that, registration fees, and what are they getting for their dollar? And is there a value? And I talk to my parents all the time, and they're all quite happy with what we're doing and see great value in it.
Others?
This is James in San Antonio with
Hey.
Urban Soccer Leadership Academy. We've been doing with all our teams weekly Zoom meetings, having college and professional coaches on to discuss the game. We haven't really done so much on the athletic side. We've been working more on the mental game, getting themselves ready for college, because I work mostly with the high school kids. So it's been pretty creative for us to be able to get these coaches on and have different discussions. We had Marla Campa, who plays for Club America Femenal, and she talked to our girls about what it is to play at the professional level. And we're having some other guests. We have Gareth Glick coming on for our boys next week, who is the South Texas Olympic coach, and then also coaches Calvary FC in the USL. So a lot of different things we've been doing to kind of keep our kids active. And then we've sent out programs to work on. But right now we're just really focusing in on the mental side.
Thank you. You know, there were a chunk of questions around this. Part of it was sort of training and keeping engaged, but the other piece were folks who were worried about how are you going to handle tryouts. There are a number of sports that are either in tryout mode or had planned to be in tryout mode here in May and June. Gabe, what are you hearing about how folks are handling tryouts when you actually can't take the field?
Yeah, kind of combination of things, right? I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are either pushing tryouts out or, waiting on things, or maybe their seasons aren't going yet. But for those people that would be holding tryouts already, just was working with one big Minnesota club earlier this week to set up a tryout kind of assessment. And they're going to pull in data from mid and end of season evaluations and give that a certain weighting. They're going to have a ranking or weighting from their DOC, a different ranking from the coach of that team, and then also possibly have a ranking that's a player self-evaluation using our system to have the players do some drills and things that they're doing right now and use all of those scores together if they can't do tryouts traditionally, and then place players on teams based on those kind of 3 or 4 different pieces of feedback to put them on the best teams that they can possibly.
How are others handling tryouts or putting kids on teams to keep them engaged?
I'll weigh in, Ruth. I think.
I'm glad.
Actually, let me, if you don't mind, I'll thread on the engagement, and then I'll just kind of flow into the tryout situation. I think, like Doug said, and as others are probably doing, and as we're doing right here with Zoom, I mean, we're using this as a tool, and it's an important one, and I think what we've tried to do at Eagle Claw, one of the things is we focus on is context and details. So the tool is one thing, but then how can we leverage some additional learning for our players out of using the tool for our meetings or whatever. So we've insisted that you not wear your pajamas, that you be dressed, and that you be showered, and that you look presentable, and that you find a quiet place, and you test your connection before you get on. And so we start to do this mental checklist and actual, task list for players before they get on the meeting. The approach is often much more important than the actual participation, oddly enough. So they show up and they're ready to learn. And those meetings can be a different contexts as well. They can be an online training session. So we've got coaches at home demonstrating techniques, and the players are following along, and then they're getting live feedback. So if you have 18 to 24 players on a Zoom call and they're being graded on their technique in front of everyone, that kind of dynamic and context, I think, is really important. It's too easy to just hand out the individual technical work and ask them to do it on their own time. It's much better to do it collectively. I think one thing that we've done that's maybe others have done it as well. Everyone's got their video games now. So we've set up FIFA 20 tournaments. We've done them on PlayStation and Xbox. We've done them as invitationals. So maybe, for example, I coach an 06 team at a pretty high level, and they just come out and say, this is an invitational. It's open to players at any club. We'll throw a prize out. And, maybe, we invited the players of one of the teams that we were not able to play because our season got cut short. And we told them they were fortunate that they didn't get the field with us, but we would see them on FIFA. And so they took the bait, and we had that kind of experience. We did this with Xbox as well. So doing different platforms, that kind of engagement, it's tough to manage, but it was fun. We also have a relationship with a Spanish professional club. So some of our Zoom meetings involve time zone issues where we do our meetings here, but it's 9 hours in Spain. And so when we're talking with the Spanish coaches, that's also a bit of a learning experience for our players. On the tryout side, I'll just hit that real quickly. We have a different philosophy at our club about tryouts. It's controversial, I know, and our belief is that tryouts with cuts shouldn't happen until kids are probably around 13 for a lot of reasons. And as a result, there's one of my sons right there. Sorry about that. That happens. Photo bombing. As a result, things are very easy for us right now with tryouts, where what we're trying to do is encourage players to simply, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to find a place to play. So we've done a 3-step player placement process where players can just register with the club, and then we do follow-up interviews with players live. So we do that on the phone or with Zoom or however we can to get to know the player this way, find out a little bit about their soccer resume firsthand, as opposed to getting it over an email or something like that, have the parents engaged as well. And then we'll take that data and internally figure out what the best challenge level is for that player based on their ambition, based on their, what they tell us about themselves. Try to make it as personal as possible. And we've done some fee reductions as well. Refunds is a different question I can talk to in terms of our experience. We have not offered refunds. And we've had some good communications with our club about it. So happy to share with that. I'll zip it for a little bit of questions.
Thank you, Joe. Others with stories about tryouts or engagement? Charlie says they're offering spots to everybody in this club, in their club this year. And Tanya from Vancouver Hockey says it's their off season, so they're not doing an awful lot, but they did do a survey to find out some data with their families about how they've been impacted. So Charlie is adding, everyone's offered a spot and they're going to have an opportunity to move between teams once they get back on the fields. So let me suggest that we move on to sort of the second chunk of questions that we got in. There were the most questions this past week about credits and refunds and the impact on your operations, on your staff. So I'm going to toss it to Chris for, what are we hearing when we're talking to clubs, and then open it up to, what are you doing? How are you dealing with the issue of paying your expenses and the fact that folks are curious about credits and refunds? Chris?
Yeah. No, I'm very curious to hear what others are doing. I feel like the approaches to this have evolved, over the last few weeks, as they should. And of course, there's not really a one size fits all. I think there's different types of organizations and businesses, right? If you run, an event-based business like camps, that's probably a different scenario than if you run sort of more year-round soccer programming. But I think, what we're hearing primarily is, and this we've been kind of preaching all along, which is the idea that, giving refunds to everybody, like, that's the last thing you want to do. Just realistically, it's not viable for most organizations who have already committed a lot of their expenses. They've already spent a lot of that money leading up to the season. And so to give a 100% refund, is going to seriously bankrupt a huge number of organizations. So that's really what you want to avoid if you can. So what we're hearing is kind of, first and foremost, it's about positioning to those parents and communication. If you're able to, Troy Pearson from the Positive Coaching Alliance was on last week and had a really good take on this, which was, the idea of communicating with parents about being transparent about the impact of a refund. If everybody asks for a refund, here's what that means for the organization. We want to be here. When we emerge, I think was the key word there. When we emerge from this, we want to be ready to serve your children. And in order to do that, we need some of this money now. And so couple interesting approaches we've heard other than just, the positioning or the communication is, in one case, a lot of organizations like Joe was sharing are offering a lot of programming. It may be non-traditional, but there's still a lot of value there. And if you're able to provide some value, and you might be able to get away with keeping the full fee. In other cases, and actually Troy put that, I think he called it social currency, right? If you're continuing to provide a positive point, as I think Gabe Skelly mentioned, something for those kids to do in the afternoon so they're not bugging mom and dad who are trying to get some work done from home. That's valuable. And there's, an opportunity to just kind of position that as valuable. When you have to, I think, credits seem to be the preferred method versus a refund. For most organizations, they need cash now. And so if you're able to maintain cash now, even if, you're going to have to deal with a bit of a credit or lost future revenue on a following season, that seems to be the preferred method. And I think that makes sense. I think maybe the last thing was, we were hearing about, we actually talked to one of our customers, Todd Larson, my co-founder and head of product, actually spoke with a customer today in Arizona, a pretty large club, multi-sport organization. And their approach was there are a couple aspects to it. One was they're not offering full refunds. So they're saying, hey, if you really need some money back, here's what we can do. I think 60% was the number they were offering on a refund because they've already spent a good bit of money. And I think they offer that as kind of an opt-in. If a parent reaches out and wants it, that's the offer. So far, apparently only about, I think he said, 50-ish out of 600 families actually took them up on that offer. So they're able to maintain a really good bit of revenue there. And then want to be clear, I don't know the tax implications of this. This is not tax advice, but he was looking into the possibility of any unreturned or unrefunded fees to have those classified as charitable donations to the organization being a nonprofit, so that the family gets a benefit from a tax standpoint on that money that wasn't refunded. So again, I don't know much about that from a legal, tax, all that perspective, but it was an interesting take that I thought was worth mentioning here. So those are a few just thoughts of things we're hearing and thinking about. I'd love to hear from some of you on what you're doing or hearing. And while we get a couple others involved, I'm actually going to kick off a poll here. So even if you don't, share on the chat here, we're going to have a poll. We'll share the results now, but we can also send those out in our follow-up email with just kind of a sense of what people are doing to solve, refunds, credits, et cetera. So I'll fire that off, and I'd love to hear from some of you on the topic.
Yeah. So what are others doing? I mean, how are you approaching this question of refunds and credits and cash flow? Anyone? Charlie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, you've got some stuff going on in the chat. What are you doing in Kentucky?
Yeah, give me just 1 second here. I have, with the homeschool, we have kids abounding around the house here. So listening's one thing, talking's another. So, okay, so we got, we're staring major problems. We're talking with all the other clubs in town. We're in Louisville, Kentucky. In most of your all's world, we're a real small club. I'd say the average club in Louisville is around 300, 350 kids. So it's a completely saturated market with the number of clubs that we deal with, but we've heard everything. I've got a club in town that wants to give refunds. We've got clubs in town that want to do a 20% credit for next year. We've got true 501c3s that are talking about going the donation route. And we're looking at all the above minus the refund. That is the last thing we want to do. As we have been doing some positioning with parents, I've been sending out email communications throughout, like on a weekly basis throughout the whole deal. And the last couple, we started to position exactly sort of how club soccer works. And our spring fees were all paid pretty much in December. And to date, I have received $2,300 back from leagues and or tournaments in refunds. So by that number, we can give everybody about $7. So obviously there's issues if the parents came. What we have found to be a challenge is the few parents that have contacted me about refunds, let's say for a high school player where we play in the fall here, we started those kids in November. We did outdoor training in November, outdoor training in December. A couple of the teams did a showcase event in January. One of them was in National League. So it's not like the teams haven't had programming, but in the parents' mind, they are owed a full refund. And that's going to be the challenge, because even at my younger age groups, where I had a parent from a 2009 team emailed me today, they participated in the winter training portion of the program, but they want half a refund. And that money's just not there. It's gone. So, we have staff costs, we have expenses, and they don't, you're dealing with parents that probably most of them may work in a business environment, but they're forgetting how business works. You have fixed costs and you have variable costs, right? So that's some of the challenges we're having right now.
Yeah. Hanifa says that they've offered their families a choice of a full refund, a credit for the future, or to convert their fees into a donation. And they've got about 12% who've chosen to donate and about 32% who've chosen a credit. They were only 1 or 2 weeks into practice in their sport, in their season. And Jennifer says that they've been able for their tournament swag to work with their supplier to change the dates that were being printed on the swag from 2020 to 2020, 2021. And that's helping with them as well. What else are people doing? Joe,
I think our poll's closed too here. Sorry, Ruth. I was going to say we could share the results of the poll as well. Yeah, it's
yeah. Haven't decided yet. That's okay.
Hey, Ruth.
Yeah.
My name is Maureen LaRoche. I'm calling from Massachusetts Youth Soccer Association. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Yay. First of all, I just want to wish everybody on the call, I hope everybody's healthy and that your families are safe. And I don't represent a club, but I work within a nonprofit organization. And regarding refunds and credits and whatnot, we were supposed to have our spring season beginning April 17th. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but we're planning and preparing like everybody else for what's next. And there's a lot of variables like governors and the health department, which we need to really, listen to before we can, have anything firm. But we need to really think about 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, how these families are going to view us in our decision-making process with credits versus refunds. And sometimes it's really hard to make that determination with people versus budgets. And there are some families, I'm sure, in all of our organizations that are really, their husbands or wives are getting furloughed and they just don't have the money. So I think everybody's going to be in a different situation. Families are going to be case by case. And I think you need to trust your gut as to what is going to retain a family or a culture or a program, because the decisions that we make are going to follow us and they're really going to show us who we become during this time of adversity.
Thank you. Give my best to Mike next time you speak to
I
him.
definitely will. I just was on a call with him like 10 minutes ago, so I will, Ruth. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Joe, did you have some ideas as well to share?
Sure. I can talk about what we've done specifically, but you know, I tend to wax a little philosophical and, you know, conceptual. So if I do that for too long, someone tell me to shut up, please. But I've been struggling with this concept because refund, credits, you know, all the various tools, and trying to put it in the context of what our club community is all about. Really trying to focus on how, you know, the challenge for us has been, how do we stay relevant? And relevancy is in the relationship. So what kind of a relationship do we have with our members, our players, our families? And the secret is communication. What do we need? What do we need to communicate to them? What do they need? What can we offer? All of these are variables. I'm actually less concerned about how, for our club, for Eagle Claw, I'm less concerned about 2021, 2022. I'm much more concerned about, you know, the next 8 weeks. And it might be a short-term horizon. So what we've done is really, again, try to make things easy, stress to our families that we're a nonprofit organization and a valuable part of the community, no different than, in our view, than an arts community, an arts nonprofit, a boys and girls club. I mean, these are all important elements of the fabrics of our community, and we don't want them to disappear. So, so we will stretch for financial assistance. We've made appeals to those members of our community that have the wherewithal and the desire to contribute, by telling them that we will use all of the contributions that they give us between now and, say, the end of July, strictly for financial assistance to those players whose families have suffered loss of income or loss of jobs. I think the more that we can communicate that we are in it with them, the better. And that's been our approach. A couple of other, maybe it's a detail. One of the things that we've noticed is sometimes that value proposition is missed. We've had some communications from players in our club who ordinarily would be playing high school soccer right now. In other words, they're with our club, but they would normally be absent from our club right now because they'd be playing high school. The high schools have not really reached out to them. High school soccer ended, and the schools, athletic departments, whatever, are not really engaged, and we've stepped into the breach to provide value programming. That's something that goes above and beyond what we would normally do for those players' schedules. And yet we've had some, you know, families talk about refunds. And so it puts a premium on communication. At least that's the way I view it.
Thank you, Joe. You know, the other piece of the questions that came in around refunds and credits also had to do with staff, with your employees, with your coaches. And are you able to keep people on the payroll? Have you had to cut them back or even furlough them? Mary Beth in the chat, she runs a volleyball club, and they had to stop paying their coaches when they stopped holding practices. How are others dealing with your employees and your coaches when the question about are you getting refund requests is hitting you in the face?
Anybody too, feel free to unmute yourself or share your video if you want to do it that way too.
Okay, so Russ says, I have kids in his background, so it's easier for him to type. So I'll read what he typed. He says, our leagues here on Long Island have not been canceled yet, as we start a bit later here in the Northeast than some other parts of the country. Intramural hasn't been canceled yet either, as we are still awaiting direction from the schools and the government. Until our leagues are canceled, it's very tough for us to communicate what we can give back to our members, as there is still some small hope of a 4-week season. As such, we're trying to work up different contingency plans. we're probably going to publicly offer credits towards the fall. And then if a family comes to us asking for a refund because of any type of financial need, we will refund their fees, no questions asked. Agree that offering 100% refund for all is challenging at best as a nonprofit in order to keep our programs going, but any family that needs it, we'll get it to them. It will mean some tough decisions going forward and trying to do more with less, but isn't that the way of nonprofits?
Yeah, that's good. I was going to jump into, I think that's been the consensus all along, is that, hey, we're going to, do our best to communicate, retain whatever funds we can, but really at the end of the day, like, what are we in this for? And pretty much, I haven't heard anyone kind of say no refunds, no questions asked. Pretty much every organization we've heard from, and including, what Maureen was saying, which I saw got a couple of +1s in the comments there. The idea that you wouldn't, giving a refund to someone who really needs it, financial loss in the family, loss of job. I mean, we got to be human about that stuff. And I think that's exactly right. It's going to hurt, but you might have just won that player, that family over for your organization for the rest of that kid's playing time. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Charlie says in Kentucky, they've furloughed their staff. Hanifa says for the Boys and Girls Clubs, they're an athletic department within a larger organization, but the whole athletics staff was furloughed and was just brought back this week because the organization got a PPP loan. Good for you. Rob in New Jersey, they're very similar to what's happening in Long Island. They're paying their coaches, but have them working with weekly Zoom sessions with their teams and helping provide content for virtual training sessions. So their coaches are working in a different way. John in South Florida says they're into their 10-month season and they're going to have to furlough coaches to retain funds so they can open up when training opens up. So tough decisions about staff.
Yeah, and actually, I'll just add too. I know, obviously that's all really tough, and nobody, wants to furlough anyone. But if it sounds like, right now the CARES Act does provide unemployment coverage for furloughed employees, which isn't furlough isn't normally eligible for unemployment, I don't believe. So that's one advantage to doing it that way if you can.
Yeah. So the last two kind of chunks of questions, there was only one question, but it was about holding an annual general meeting and online. And I live online doing meetings. And so the suggestions I'd make around that have to do with being very clear about what you need to accomplish in that online meeting. That's one meeting you do not want to ramble all over. What information do you need to share? What decisions do you need to make? And make things very focused and very crisp. If you wander around, it'll make it even harder. For folks who are living online, the online meetings can be actually more tiring mentally and physically than doing them in person. So and the other thing would be picking your platform. Is it a meeting platform like we're using here where everybody's on all together, or do you need to segment it more in a webinar kind of thing where you have presenters and you have also participants, but they're not all live and can talk with each other and over each other. And if you have things like the poll function, whether it's in Zoom or GoToWebinar, that can help you with voting. So being very clear about what decisions have to be made at those annual general meetings. And I guess the last suggestion I would give is don't make a punch list agenda that just says, budget, elections, training. Go ahead and fill out that agenda. So if you're asking people to vote on something, put the question on the agenda or put the candidates on the agenda. Make that agenda more like a rolling description of what you're going to do, what you're going to hear, what questions have to be answered so people can easily follow what comes next, and you can get your work done without it being hours and hours and hours of AGM.
Yeah, I'll just add too. I think that's something I've learned too over time. Is just the idea of, the meeting. It's a decision meeting, right? As much as possible. If you're able to give people the right context and information ahead of time. I mean, I know that's like Amazon, for example. That's a big thing of theirs too. Is they do memos, and you're expected to spend the first few minutes of the meeting reading and discuss. For one type of meeting, and others, that's all done ahead of time, and you show up just to make the decision, not to spend 40 minutes explaining the context and the backstory of what needs to happen.
When I teach people about meetings, there are really only 3 things you do in a meeting. That's the dirty little secret about facilitation. You share information, think updates, reports. You make sense of information, think discussion, what does it mean? What's the significance? And you make decisions. And if you're really clear about which thing you have to accomplish, your meeting will go a whole lot better. Because if you think you're making a decision and you get stuck in giving out reports and updates, you'll be really frustrated at the end of your meeting. And there's no sense to do that. So the last set of questions are the hardest to answer, right? The last set of questions we got, and there were like 10 of them, I think, all had to do with the future. All had to do with this crystal ball that we don't have yet, or at least it's really cloudy, right? What are sports going to look like? What's that transition look like from now to getting our kids back on the field and back on the ice? What are the new policies and procedures? What new things are we going to have to do to make that happen? And how can we keep kids and parents and families engaged with our clubs and our sports and not lose them altogether while we're in this really frustrating kind of time? So I want to sort of open it up here to what do you see happening in your part of the country, in your country? We've got folks here from both Canada and the US. What are your crystal balls telling you about what's it going to look like when we actually get to go play the games we love? A harder question to answer. Randy, do you have an idea?
Yeah, hi, this is Randy Sparrow with Nova Premier Soccer in Massachusetts. Hi, Maureen. We're anticipating, and we're hopeful there'll be some type of a summer, late spring, early into summer. Until we're told not, we're gonna continue to plan for it. We do know though that if we do get out on the field, there's going to be some changes. We can anticipate not going to Lancaster and having 200 spectators on the side of a field and watching a match. So we know there's going to be a limited people at the fields, and how that works out. And also we're expecting that when we do start training and playing in games, we're loading up right now on disinfectant and wipes and and hand sanitizers. Expecting to wipe the balls down 2 or 3 times a game. Having the kids wash their hands before, maybe at half and afterwards. So those are some of the things that we anticipate, being hopeful that we'll still get in some soccer before the fall.
So Charlie says he also coaches high school in addition to his club soccer. And in high school, they play in the fall. And he was in a meeting with his athletic director this week in Kentucky. They're telling us they're going to try and do an abbreviated fall season, but they also think students will be required to wear gloves and masks at school. So the question is, how do you play any sport? There's some concern that players may have to have temperatures taken before their games, and there's talk of not allowing fans. Other ideas? What else are you hearing in your corner of the world?
It's Tanya from Vancouver. I think the big thing is going to be that we're being told just not to expect it to be the same. And nobody really knows exactly what it's going to be. And Hockey Canada has basically put out saying that they're very optimistic we'll have a season in September. They just don't know exactly what that is. So we don't, it makes, you just have that many more contingency plans to have to set up, because our rosters could be full rosters of 15 kids. It could be only 3-on-3 that you're only allowed 6 kids per team. We don't know at this point in time. We also have the misfortune, as opposed to all you soccer folks, we are an indoor sport, which according to health authorities is a harder thing to manage than outside. So really what we're trying to do is simply plan for what we normally would do, because that would be the biggest number of people around and on the ice and number of teams. And then we'll adjust as we find out. For those of us in British Columbia, we are fortunate in the sense that our numbers are declining. So we are potentially a bit ahead of the curve from a lot of our other provinces and some of the states. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to set some trends and be able to help people out. But at this point in time, our health authorities are not saying anything other than we need to start thinking about things, but they're not giving any direct guidance.
We're hearing similar things. Mary Beth is talking about volleyball, and volleyball's in the same same predicament that hockey is in terms of it being an indoor sport, and futsal as well. Charlie reminds futsal's indoors often as well. Rob in New Jersey talks about sanitation stations that would be at all practices and games, perhaps temperature checks, and points out that that's going to add additional costs to somebody's organization to cover those extra activities, that extra equipment. Other thoughts about a crystal ball that is still just really cloudy? Anyone have some good news? Oh, come on, Charlie. Oh. So are you hearing anything, Gabe, about the future in the folks you're talking with?
Yeah, I mean, I get kind of different things, right? Because I talk to all the customers all over the world and all the different sports, and I've got some soccer customers. I was talking to one of the guys yesterday. They've got 22 of their own fields, and he's keeping them super prepped. So as soon as this stuff rolls out, they can, have all the lines on the field ready to roll out and go. Customers in volleyball and hockey trying to figure out what they're going to do when this rolls out. Suggestions of, cleaning off the devices, whatever they're going to use, be it a hockey puck or a ball, having kids wear face masks in whatever sport it is, so that the, germs droplets don't get moved around. There seems to be a pretty good sense that they're going to have some changes with spectators so that there aren't as big of gatherings. So if that means games being, live streamed instead of parents coming watching them, that's definitely a big change. And just an overall feeling of, that this is going to open up fairly soon. A lot of people feel like it's going to open up fairly soon, but just all these changes to making it a, less contagious environment when people are out doing the things.
So for those of you, some folks are blessed with having their own facilities, their own gym, their own fields. There are an awful lot of folks, you're leasing facilities from the local Parks and Recreation Department or the local school district. Are you hearing anything from the folks you would rent fields from about extra permit conditions they might give you? If you're going to use our field, if you're going to use our gym, these are the new rules for use. John says in Florida, they're being told by their county that they're not going to be on the fields until late August or September. And in some cases, the departments are all shut down, so you're not getting much communication because nobody's at work. It doesn't sound like you're hearing much at this point.
Hey, Ruth, we're hearing about indemnification agreements from landlords. So that's coming. So expect that people are scrutinizing their insurance policies and trying to figure out, what kind of communicable disease protection they have. Are they in line for lawsuits? That's coming, so it's going to flow through to tenants, and we're being told that rental agreements will have new safety protocols as well as indemnification agreements to protect that landlord from, one of your players spreading it to somewhere else, or I mean, let your mind run wild here. I mean, everyone's going to be looking to protect themselves, I think.
Wow. Wow. All right. We've got a few more minutes. What other questions have come to mind? I didn't want to box this in with just the ones that we had. We just happen to have had a lot of them. What else do you want to bounce off the group here in our last few minutes together? Anyone? Charlie asks, with indemnification, what kind of policy would a club have to pick up to be protected, and what is that price? Anybody have any ideas about that? I don't think we have any of our insurance friends on today.
I can tell you, because I've been trying to shop, so this is a little bit early trying to evaluate our club's insurance policies. I can tell you that it's a good luck scenario. Every insurance company is rewriting their policies right now. If they didn't have those exclusions, they do now. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of, really cost-effective policies that we're going to be able to get for our nonprofit org. I don't really know what this is going to look like. I don't know what those agreements are going to look like, but landlords are visiting with their lawyers and trying to figure out what they need. And I guess we'll hear from them soon.
Oh. So, Different Joe has a question. What club teams are still planning on attending tournaments that haven't been canceled yet? Are you withdrawing due to the liability issue to your club? What are people doing about tournaments, upcoming tournaments? I know we had a discussion, was it last week or the week before, about tournaments and refunds and that the angst about, some tournaments not providing them, but that's a little different than attending them in terms of the liability concerns for your teams and your players. Charlie says he's withdrawing all his teams. Doesn't look like they're going to be doing tournaments. Any other ideas? Russ, all tournaments around here seem to be canceled through Memorial Day. I think the days of traveling for tournaments with hotels are gone for a while. Regionals are still scheduled, but John Hurst is not getting a lot of information about that. And Cal Ripken Baseball has yet to cancel their tournament trail, which is a state, regional, and World Series. All right.
I would say on one side of that, from customers I talk to, is we do have a fair amount of customers that run, tournaments and especially camp-based things. And I've seen a lot of those kind of pushed off for now. I haven't seen really much of any cancellations, but more dates that are being, pushed further in the future with the hopes that everything will open up by at least, down in the States here by that, June period of time where they can still do some of these things. And those are all pretty much sports where they can do things outside, not as restrictive as being in hockey rinks or volleyball areas for now. But I haven't seen a lot of them fully canceled. There's a lot of dates being pushed, later in the future. So,
yeah. So one last question before we wrap this up. Timothy wants to know if we've got any suggestions for him for how to approach fundraising. They're a town-based nonprofit program, and they rely on local businesses for sponsorships and scholarships. What can you tell Timothy? Charlie? Or a new topic for next week? We can push sponsorships and scholarships and fundraising. We can put that on for next week as well.
I know there's a lot of things out there. We've talked about some digital platforms that people use, different ways to get, your base just to, when they spend money in different ways to bring into your organization. I think that's definitely a topic we could bring a lot of things on, a lot of ideas on fundraising for nonprofits and just for organizations that aren't nonprofits to bring money in hard times. And I think one of the big things, if we push that to next week, is just thinking about communication too, communication being key in these times for everything, with the players and parents and organizations.
We just don't know. The economic impact is really big. Kentucky has 22% unemployment right now. Oh my goodness. We could do a poll to see how many organizations got PPP assistance or EIDL assistance as well. We can put that on the list and add that too. Chris, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to stop today. So we've got a couple leading topics into next week. We're going to keep doing this as long as people keep showing up. So same time next week and the week after and probably the week after that. So welcome, we welcome you back as often as you'd like. We're just going to keep doing this. Please submit the topics ahead of time. If you have any ideas, just could be anything, or if you want to share a story, it'd be nice to, maybe we could get some good news stories too. If anyone's seen anything really cool happen in their club, whether that's, players coming together, coaches stepping up, volunteer charity opportunities, whatever that looks like, that would be cool to hear about too. So drop those in when you register and we will make sure to get them on the agenda. But no, thank you everyone again, and hope everyone stays healthy and well, and hopefully we'll talk to you next week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.